Hello, dear friends. Today, I will bring you an interesting story that you will surely enjoy. Prepare a seat, a cup of coffee, and let's start exploring the story. The rain poured relentlessly, obscuring the shimmering lights of the New York City skyline through the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows. From his luxurious penthouse, Daniel Carter gazed at the storm, his reflection a faint silhouette against the glass. The vibrant, chaotic energy of the city below felt a universe away from the hollow stillness of his meticulously arranged home. The space was immaculate, marble counters gleamed, and the leather furniture looked untouched, more like a showroom than a living space. The only sounds were the faint hum of distant traffic and the occasional crackle of the dying embers in the fireplace. Daniel had it all: wealth, power, and influence. Yet he felt an aching void within. As the clock ticked past midnight, he finally rose from his chair, the weight of another empty night pressing heavily on him. The ache in his chest was not physical but painfully familiar, a constant companion since betrayal had fractured his trust years ago. Grabbing his coat and keys, he decided to escape the suffocating confines of his penthouse for a late-night drive through the rain. The streets were eerily quiet, the rain creating rippling reflections on the pavement as Daniel's sleek black car pulled into the underground parking garage beneath his building. A shadow near the entrance to an alley caught his eye. At first, he assumed it was a pile of discarded clothes left in the rain. But as his headlights passed over it, he realized it was a person. A young woman curled up against the damp brick wall, her knees drawn to her chest, trembling under an oversized, soaked hoodie. Daniel's stomach tightened. He turned off the engine and sat for a moment, debating. He never got involved in such situations, yet something about the way she clung to herself, hiding her face, felt wrong to ignore. Finally, he stepped out of the car. The cold rain hit him immediately, drenching his hair and shoes as he approached cautiously. "Hey," he called out, his voice firm but gentle. The girl flinched, shrinking further into the shadows. "I'm not going to hurt you," Daniel added quickly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. She lifted her face then, pale and framed by strands of wet, tangled hair. Her striking green eyes locked with his, holding a quiet defiance despite her vulnerability. "I'm fine," she rasped, her voice rough from the cold. "You're clearly not fine," he replied, her chin lifted in defiance. "I didn't break in. I'm just trying to stay dry. I'll leave if you want me to." Daniel hesitated, his logical mind telling him to walk away. But something in her voice, her quiet dignity even in her condition, stirred something in him. "You're freezing," he said, stepping closer. "How long have you been out here?" A pause. She shifted uncomfortably. "Since this afternoon." Daniel exhaled slowly, his eyes taking in her soaked clothes and the way she trembled. "Look," he said softly, "I'm not calling the cops, but you can't stay out here. It's not safe. Come inside, warm up, take a shower, and then you can go." Suspicion flickered in her eyes. "Why would you do that?" she asked warily. He hesitated, unsure of his own answer. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I can't just leave you out here like this." She studied him for a long moment, rain dripping from her lashes, before giving a small, reluctant nod. "Okay, just for a little while." Daniel led her through a side entrance and into the elevator that opened directly into his penthouse. The silence between them was heavy with tension. Her name, Mia, was whispered reluctantly as they stepped inside. She stood awkwardly near the door, arms wrapped tightly around herself. He handed her a towel and gestured toward the hallway. "The bathroom is through there. There's a robe you can use. I'll make you something warm to drink." She nodded silently and disappeared down the hall. Daniel exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath. What was he doing? Bringing a stranger, someone who clearly lived on the streets. Into his home went against every instinct. He wasn't careless. He had been betrayed before. Yet, there was something about Mia that drew him in. It wasn't pity. It was curiosity. Or maybe something deeper. Something he wasn't ready to name. The sound of running water echoed from the bathroom, breaking the silence. Daniel kept himself busy in the kitchen, brewing tea, his mind a whirlwind of questions. Who was she? What had brought her to this point? And why did he feel this inexplicable urge to help her? Outside the bathroom, he sat at the edge of his oversized leather sofa, staring at a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. The city lights shimmered through the rain-speckled windows, casting shifting patterns across the dark wooden floor. He couldn't stop thinking about Mia, just a girl down on her luck. Yet there was something different about her. It was the way she had looked at him when he first offered help, not with desperation or gratitude, but with defiance and pride. It reminded him of himself before betrayal had taught him that trust often led to pain. And yet, here she was, a stranger, vulnerable and hurting, standing in his home. He couldn't shake the feeling there was more to her story. The sound of the bathroom door opening pulled him from his thoughts, and as he turned, his breath caught. Mia stepped out, her damp hair falling softly around her face, the oversized robe cinched tightly at her waist. But it wasn't just her appearance that struck him. It was the way she stood, shoulders squared, as if bracing herself for rejection. Her eyes held a quiet strength, the look of someone who had fought battles alone for far too long. Daniel cleared his throat, setting down his untouched tea. "Feel better?" he asked. She nodded, her fingers gripping the edges of the robe as though trying to disappear into it. "Yes, thank you. Really?" He gestured toward the steaming cup he had placed on the marble countertop earlier. "I made tea if you want it." Mia hesitated for a moment before stepping closer, wrapping her hands around the cup. She savored its warmth, but barely met his gaze. "Thank you again," she said softly, her tone more sincere this time. Daniel nodded, saying nothing. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the steady rain outside. Finally, Mia shifted, setting the cup down. "I should go," she said quietly, already glancing toward the door. "You've done more than enough. I don't want to impose." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. She wanted to leave? "Wait," he said, the word escaping before he could stop it. Mia paused, frowning slightly as she turned back to him. Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair, unsure why he felt so compelled to stop her. "You don't have anywhere to go, do you?" he asked. Her lips parted as if to argue, but she didn't. Her gaze dropped, fingers clutching the robe tightly. "No," she admitted quietly, "but that's not your problem. I can figure it out." Daniel shook his head, tension knotting in his chest. "This city, in the middle of the night, that's not safe." "I can handle myself," she replied, her voice calm, though the slight tremble in it betrayed her. He could see the exhaustion now, the way her shoulders sagged despite her defiance. "Stay," he said firmly, his tone softening. "At least for tonight. Just one night. You can leave in the morning if you want." Mia hesitated, searching his face as though trying to uncover his true motives. "Why are you being so nice to me?" she whispered. Daniel's chest tightened. Because no one had been kind to him when he needed it most. Because he understood what it felt like to be lost. Because, deep down, he didn't want her to leave. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he shrugged, masking his emotions behind a detached facade. "Everyone deserves a safe place to sleep." Mia swallowed hard, her walls threatening to crumble. She wanted to refuse, to run, but the warmth of the tea lingered in her hands, and the storm outside continued to rage. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, just tonight." Daniel nodded in return, relief washing over him. Daniel gestured down the hallway. The guest room is that way. There are fresh towels and blankets. If you need anything, I'll be out here. Mia murmured a quiet thank you and slipped into the guest room, closing the door softly behind her. Daniel exhaled deeply, sinking back into the couch, the tension in his chest refusing to ease. What was he doing? She was just a stranger, a homeless girl in need of shelter. But when he closed his eyes, he couldn't shake the image of her face, the way she looked at him, like someone terrified to be seen yet yearning to be understood. He felt it in his gut. She wasn't just passing through his life. She was going to change it. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Daniel's penthouse, painting the sleek surfaces in warm, golden hues. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving the city sparkling in the clear light of day. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sound of eggs sizzling on the stove. Daniel stood at the kitchen island, preparing breakfast, his thoughts spinning. She had stayed. He hadn't expected that. Mia had barely spoken after he offered her a place to sleep. She disappeared into the guest room without a word, and for hours, he wondered if she would vanish before morning. But she didn't. She emerged cautiously now, her damp hair neatly braided, still wearing the oversized robe he had given her. She looked different, cleaner, softer, and yet there was something guarded in her eyes. "Good morning," Daniel said, keeping his tone casual as she hesitated near the table. "Morning," she replied quietly, her voice laced with caution. He gestured to the plate he had just placed on the table. "I made breakfast if you're hungry." Mia blinked, surprised. "You didn't have to do that." Daniel shrugged. "You need to eat. Sit." Reluctantly, she lowered herself into the chair, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the napkin as though unused to such small comforts. They ate in near silence, the clinking of forks on plates filling the air. Daniel stole glances at her, waiting for her to speak. But when she didn't, he broke the quiet. "You stayed. I wasn't sure you would." Mia kept her eyes on her plate. "I almost didn't." Daniel nodded slowly, setting his fork down. "But you did." Her gaze lifted to meet his, softer now but still cautious. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he pressed gently. "Family? Friends?" Her eyes fell again, and her fingers tightened around the fabric of the robe. "I used to," she said quietly. Silence stretched between them, heavier this time. Daniel wanted to press for more, but he held back. She wasn't ready. As Mia finished the last bite of toast, he collected their plates and set them in the sink. "You can stay longer if you need to," he offered, his voice soft. When he turned back, she looked startled. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. "You're not," he replied, his tone more vulnerable than he intended. Later that morning, as Daniel worked in his home office, his thoughts kept drifting back to Mia. The guest room door remained closed, the quietness unsettling. Giving in to curiosity, he walked down the hallway. The door was ajar, and he hesitated before peeking in. Through the small crack, he saw her. Mia stood by the large painting on the far wall, an original by a world-renowned artist. The piece was worth more than most people earned in a year. But she wasn't just looking at it. She was tracing her fingers along the delicate frame, her head tilted as if trying to memorize every detail. Daniel's stomach tightened. Was she planning something? He shook his head. "Don't be stupid, Daniel." But old wounds whispered, reminding him how people had taken advantage before. Still, he couldn't bring himself to interrupt. Something about the scene made him pause, made him wonder who she really was and what her story might be. "People always want something. Trust just gets you hurt," Daniel said as he stepped into the room, his voice sharper than intended. Mia jumped, spinning around. I'm sorry. I wasn't touching it. Daniel folded his arms, his brow furrowing. It's expensive. You were looking pretty closely. Hurt flashed across her face. Do you think I'm here to steal from you? Silence. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but didn't answer. Mia straightened, her voice trembling but steady. I get it. You don't trust me. People don't trust girls like me, right? I'm just the homeless woman you took pity on. Daniel opened his mouth to reply, but Mia cut him off, her voice rising. Not everyone is out to take advantage of you, Daniel. She moved toward the door, her hands shaking. Look, you've done enough. I'll leave. Clearly, you think the worst of me. As she reached for her bag near the bed, something tumbled out. A small, worn photograph fluttered to the floor. Daniel instinctively bent down and picked it up. His breath caught. The photograph was old but well preserved. A younger Mia stood beside an older woman who bore a striking resemblance to her, perhaps her mother. The background wasn't a rundown alley but a well-kept garden. Both of them were smiling, vibrant, happy, not broken, not lost. Mia froze when she saw him holding the picture. Where did you get this? Daniel asked, his voice softer now. She swallowed hard, her guard beginning to crumble. It's all I have left of my mom. Daniel hesitated, something shifting inside him. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have assumed. She shook her head, blinking back tears. No, it's fine. I'm used to it. Daniel stepped closer, still holding the photo. You weren't always living on the streets, were you? A pause. Then, in a voice softer, broken, Mia replied, No. Daniel stared at her, feeling the fragile edges of trust forming between them. For the first time, he realized there was so much more to her story, and he wanted to know it. Stay, he said quietly, holding the photo out to her. Just stay a little longer. Let me help. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, she didn't argue. She nodded, and just like that, the walls between them began to crack. By evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the city bathed in a soft, pale glow from the setting sun. The penthouse felt quieter than usual, the tension between Daniel and Mia lingering in the air like an unspoken weight. Daniel sat on the corner of the couch, flipping absently through a book he wasn't really reading. Across the room, Mia sat by the window, gazing out at the glittering skyline. For the past few days, she had stayed, but the silence between them had grown heavier, as if both were waiting for the other to break it. It was Daniel who finally spoke, his voice low. You don't have to keep staying if you don't want to. I don't want you to feel trapped here. Mia turned to him, her expression softer now. I know. I don't really have anywhere else right now. A beat passed before she added quietly, but I appreciate what you've done for me. No one else has. Daniel nodded, his fingers tightening around the book. The vulnerability in her voice stirred something deep within him. Later that evening, they sat together at the kitchen island, the glow of the city casting shadows across the marble countertops. The quiet tension lingered, but something had shifted. Daniel poured 2 cups of tea and finally broke the silence. You asked why I don't trust people. Mia looked up, surprised by his sudden honesty. He stared into his cup, his voice quiet but steady. I wasn't always like this. I used to believe the best in people, thought I could help everyone, make a difference. But then, his jaw tightened. My best friend, and the woman I was engaged to, He exhaled, as though forcing the words out. They were working together. Stole from me. Not just money. They destroyed everything I built, Daniel said quietly. The company, my reputation, everything. Mia's expression softened. When she first met him, he had seemed untouchable. But now, he felt human. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Daniel shrugged, his expression guarded once more. Since then, I've kept people at a distance. It's easier, safer. He looked up, meeting her gaze. But I don't want to be like that anymore. The silence that followed was heavier, charged with the weight of his confession. Finally, Mia inhaled deeply, as though summoning courage. I wasn't always like this either, she began, her voice barely audible. Daniel leaned closer, listening intently. My mom, she was everything to me. Strong, kind, and brilliant. She worked so hard to give me a shot at life. But when she got sick, everything changed. Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. I left college early to take care of her. I tried to juggle it all, work, medical bills, but it wasn't enough. When she passed, Mia looked away, blinking back tears. I was alone, and everything we had fell apart. The house, my job. I just lost control. Daniel watched her closely, his chest tightening at the pain in her voice. She wasn't just surviving. She had been fighting for so long. You never told me what you were doing before all this, Daniel said gently. Mia gave a faint, bitter smile. I was trying to start a small bakery. It was my dream, but I was in over my head, too many loans. And when my mom got sick, I had to let it go. I lost everything. And once you're down like that, her voice trailed off. It feels impossible to climb back up. Daniel was silent for a moment, then set his tea down. You don't have to stay down, you know. Mia blinked, surprised. You're stronger than you think, he continued, his voice firm. You kept going when most people would have given up. That says something. She shook her head, her voice fragile. It doesn't feel like strength. It feels like surviving. Barely. Daniel exhaled slowly. Surviving is strength. And you have it, Mia, whether you see it or not. In the days that followed, something shifted. Daniel began leaving books on the coffee table, self-help guides, business journals, even novels he thought Mia might enjoy. At first, she was hesitant, but eventually, he caught her reading late into the night, absorbed in the words. He started encouraging her to consider job options, even printing out a list of nearby places that were hiring. When he mentioned her dream of baking, she hesitated, but there was a spark in her eyes he hadn't seen before. They were healing together, but trust was still fragile, and cracks were beginning to show. One afternoon, Daniel's phone buzzed. The screen flashed a name he hadn't seen in years, Michael Green. His former business partner, the one who had betrayed him. Daniel's hand clenched around the phone as his pulse quickened. He hesitated before answering, his voice cold. What do you want? Michael's voice was smooth. Too smooth. Just heard you've been keeping some interesting company lately. Figured I'd check in, see if you're making the same mistakes, trusting the wrong people again. Daniel's stomach twisted. His eyes flicked toward the guest room, where Mia sat reading quietly, unaware of the storm brewing just outside her door. This isn't your business anymore, Daniel said, his voice sharp. Stay out of it. Michael chuckled, the sound grating. Just be careful, Daniel. People don't change. Remember that. The line went dead. Daniel stared at the phone, his mind racing. Michael was wrong. Mia was different. But old scars whispered, what if she isn't? Suddenly, the walls he had worked so hard to tear down began building back up again. The penthouse was unusually quiet that afternoon. The city hummed softly in the background, but inside, tension hung in the air like an approaching storm. Daniel sat in his home office, flipping through documents, but his focus was elsewhere, his thoughts tangled in doubt and mistrust. He glanced toward the hallway, toward the guest room where Mia stayed. He wanted to believe in her, in the connection they had begun to build. But Michael's words lingered, poisoning his thoughts. People don't change. He shook it off, staring at the skyline. Mia isn't like that, he told himself. But then why was he still second-guessing her? Why couldn't he shake this gnawing feeling that something was off? From the hallway, the faint murmur of Mia's voice broke the silence. Daniel frowned, standing. The door to the guest room was slightly ajar. Mia sat on the edge of the bed, her back turned, speaking into her phone in a hushed tone. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but her words froze him. Yes, I'm still here. He doesn't know. I just need to figure out how to get access to the money. It's a large sum, enough to make things right. Daniel's heart clenched. A cold wave of realization hit him. His chest tightened as old scars resurfaced. The betrayal, the lies. Was the kindness he'd shown her just being used? Mia hung up the call, unaware he was standing in the doorway. When she turned and saw him, the gentle smile on her face vanished instantly. Daniel, what's wrong? He took a slow step forward, his expression tight with restrained anger. Who were you talking to? She blinked, taken aback. It was personal. Personal, he repeated bitterly. Sounded more like financial. Her brows furrowed. What? No, it's not what you think. Daniel's voice sharpened, cutting her off. I let you into my home, trusted you, and all along, you were planning this, weren't you? Lying, manipulating me. Mia's face drained of color. Daniel, what are you talking about? He stepped closer, fists clenched at his sides. I heard you, Mia, talking about a large sum of money, enough to make things right. What does that mean? Were you waiting for the perfect moment to cash in? Her breath hitched, her eyes wide with disbelief. You think I'm using you? After everything I told you? After everything we've shared? Daniel's silence spoke louder than words. Mia's voice cracked, the pain evident. I told you the truth about my mother, about losing everything. And you think I've been lying this entire time? He stared at her, but his walls were already up, reinforced by years of distrust and Michael's venomous words. Prove me wrong, he said coldly. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Her hands trembled as she reached into her bag, pulling out a folded piece of paper. She held it out toward him, her voice unsteady. This is what you heard me talking about. Daniel hesitated before snatching the paper. He unfolded it, scanning its contents. It was a legal document, a letter from a small law firm about a pending settlement. Mia's voice was barely a whisper now. I was calling the lawyer handling my mother's estate. The settlement's been delayed for months. It's not much, but it's enough to start over. I was going to pay you back, Daniel, every cent, because I didn't want you to think I needed charity. Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him, guilt and shame washing over him. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Mia shook her head slowly, her voice breaking. I trusted you, Daniel. I thought we were finally, she swallowed hard. I thought you understood me. But you don't, do you? You still see me as some charity case. Someone who couldn't possibly be here for anything real. Mia, No. She backed away, her arms wrapping around herself as though holding the pieces of her heart together. I opened up to you. I let you see parts of me I don't show anyone. And you? Her voice cracked. You saw me as a liar, just like everyone else. Daniel felt like the air had been knocked from his lungs. Mia, wait. But she was already moving, grabbing her worn bag and heading for the door. The rain had started again, soft and steady, as if echoing the tension in the room. The cold pressed against the windows as Daniel stood frozen, the door shutting behind Mia with a hollow click. The echo lingered far longer than it should have, and in that silence, all he could think was, I've just lost her. Several weeks passed, and the city felt colder without her. Daniel stood at the massive windows of his penthouse, the same view he had once found so captivating, so powerful. Now, it felt lifeless. The rain had returned, streaking the glass in thin lines, blurring the skyline he used to admire. None of it mattered. His wealth, his success. He had pushed her away, and now she was gone. The memory haunted him. The look in her eyes as she handed him the settlement letter. The crack in her voice when she asked if he thought she was just another liar. He had doubted her, let his past blind him, and for weeks, regret gnawed at him. He had tried calling, no answer. He visited the shelters he could think of, nothing. Every night, the silence of his penthouse grew heavier. Until tonight. Tonight, something had to change. The call came unexpectedly. Daniel had been scrolling through old messages, spiraling deeper into regret, when his assistant Carol called. "Sir, I think I found her." Daniel's heart jolted. "Where?" "St. Mark's Shelter. She's been volunteering there every evening, helping women get back on their feet." His breath caught. Even after everything, she was still helping others. The shelter was a modest brick building tucked into a quiet neighborhood. No luxury, no shine, just a safe haven for those in need. Daniel's sleek black car felt out of place as he pulled up, the exterior glistening under the drizzle. He hesitated at the door, the knot in his chest tightening, but he had to do this. Inside, the scent of warm food and clean linen lingered. Soft voices echoed from the common room, where a group of women folded donated clothes and chatted quietly. And then he saw her. Mia. She sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a few young women, gently explaining how to fill out job applications. Her face was tired but calm, her hair pulled back into a loose braid. But the light, the spark he remembered, seemed dimmer now. And it was his fault. She hadn't seen him yet. Daniel swallowed hard, his heart thudding painfully as he stepped forward. "Mia." She looked up. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to freeze. Her lips parted, surprise flashing across her face, but it was quickly replaced by caution. The warmth she had once shown him was gone, replaced with walls he had built himself. Daniel took a breath, his voice low. "Can we talk? Please." They stepped into a quiet corner of the shelter, rain tapping softly against the windows. Daniel searched for the right words, feeling more vulnerable than he had in years. "Mia, I was wrong." She crossed her arms, her gaze guarded. "I know." The softness of her voice broke him more than anger ever could. "I let my past cloud my judgment," he began. "I accused you of things that weren't true. And I'm sorry. I was scared. Scared of getting hurt, of being vulnerable. But that's no excuse for how I treated you." Her eyes shimmered, but she held firm. "You didn't just doubt me, Daniel. You doubted who I am. I trusted you. I opened up to you. And you still saw me as someone you needed to protect yourself from." Daniel nodded, his throat tight. "I know. And I hate that I made you feel that way." He took a step closer, his voice breaking. "You've been through so much, Mia, and yet here you are, helping people, fighting for others, even when you're still healing yourself. That's strength. That's courage. And I finally understand. It's not your struggles that define you. It's your heart. And I see it now. I don't care about your past or your pain. I care about you." Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head. "Daniel, I need more." "More than words," Mia said, her voice firm but trembling. "I need trust. I can't be with someone who questions me every time things get hard." Daniel nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "You're right. I need to do better. I will do better, if you give me the chance." Silence hung between them, thick with uncertainty, until Mia's hand tentatively reached for his, hesitant but real. "I'm scared too," she whispered. Daniel brushed his thumb over her knuckles, his voice steady. "Then we can be scared together." The sun beamed brightly over a small building with a freshly painted sign, the Rosewood Center for Women. It was everything Mia had once dreamed of, a safe space where women like her, women who had been abandoned, struggling, or lost, could rebuild their lives. and Daniel had ensured it wasn't just a donation. He had partnered with her, encouraging her to lead the project while he handled the financial backing quietly from the sidelines. This was her dream, her vision. And today, it had come true. Mia stood by the entrance, her smile radiant and full of hope, as the first group of women walked through the doors. Each one carried their own story, their own pain, but here, they would begin to heal. Daniel approached quietly, watching her from a distance before finally stepping beside her. She looked up at him, her smile soft and genuine. "You did this," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, we did this." They stood there, hand in hand, watching as the women inside began their journeys toward healing. The past wasn't forgotten, but together, they were building something stronger, something real. And so, Daniel and Mia's story reminds us that love isn't about wealth or appearances. It's about trust, forgiveness, and recognizing the strength within each other. If this heartfelt journey touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder of the power of compassion. For more inspiring stories that warm the heart and restore faith in humanity, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with another unforgettable story.